Chapter 203, Young Drunkard. The barefoot old man walked out from the bamboo building at some unknown time, and he walked over to the cliffside and stood beside Chen Ping'an. He smiled and asked, "What are you doing? After overcoming a huge challenge, are you recalling your sufferings and contrasting them with your happiness now?" Chen Ping'an's train of thought was interrupted, and after he came to his senses, he took a sip of wine before turning around and saying with a smile, "Is this not very good?" The old man was dressed in coarse white clothes today, and he appeared especially refreshed and refined. "Not very good. It's as good as can be. How dull would it be if one didn't have any hopes and aspirations? True heroes are those who can endure hardships and enjoy prosperity. When suffering hardships, don't be a sissy who goes around complaining to everyone about how much you're suffering. When enjoying prosperity, make sure to be at ease and enjoy things to your heart's content. If it's prosperity that you've earned, then why should you be forced to enjoy it in secret?" Chen Ping'an nodded and replied, "Some of my words might displease you, senior, but they're genuinely words from the bottom of my heart. Are you willing to hear them? I've never said them to anyone else before, not even to Liu Xianyang, my very best friend." The barefoot old man squatted down beside the bamboo chair and said in amusement, "Oh, is it the crap about your pitiful past? Sure, go ahead and amuse me." Chen Ping'an took a sip of wine and didn't get angry at all. He offered the small red gourd to the old man, but the old man waved his hand and said that he wasn't a fan of the low-quality wine. Chen Ping'an opened his heart up and slowly said, "Even though I howled in agony every time I practiced fist techniques with Senior, and I secretly cried a few times and felt like I would genuinely be killed by you, I still feel like my childhood was the most difficult time of my life. I clearly remembered the first time I had entered the mountains to gather herbs by myself. The sun was very, very big in the sky, and I was carrying a large bamboo basket that was almost my height. I was very ambitious back then, and I thought that I would be able to collect more herbs if I brought a bigger basket with me. That way, Mother would also get better quicker. However, the skin on my shoulders was scraped off very quickly, and once the sun shone on it and my sweat trickled over it, I felt a searing pain course through my body. Most importantly, I had only just walked out of the small town at that time. Upon realizing that I would need to endure this pain for half a day or an entire day, I genuinely felt like giving up right there and then." The old man snickered. He wasn't snickering at Chen Ping'an, and he had instead recalled the extravagant lifestyles of his descendants in the Kui clan. The Kui clan had enjoyed lofty status and wealth for many generations, and they were a top-notch clan in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. When teaching fist techniques to the young children in the clan, all of them would act as if they were suffering a great grievance. Moreover, this was only for standing meditation. These children would complain to their parents after returning home. When it was winter, the children wrapped up in layers of fur coats would feel as if they were suffering the greatest hardship in the world when they were told to attend school in the morning. When it was New Year's Eve, the children would also ask their elders and ancestors for extremely thick red envelopes. The barefoot old man hadn't liked this, yet his brothers and relatives in the same generation as him had all genuinely enjoyed going along with this. As the saying goes, the child who cries gets candy. "The second time was because I was starving," Chen Ping'an continued. "I had no rice left, and I had already sold everything that I could sell. I starved for a day, yet I didn't have the courage to beg others for food. So I walked up and down the alley and hoped that someone would walk up to me and invite me for a meal. Winter was truly very cold that year. The summer months weren't as bad, because I could simply wear fewer layers of clothes regardless of how poor I was. Not only that, but I could even enter the mountains to collect herbs and exchange them for some copper coins. While collecting herbs, I could also collect some wild greens and fruits as well. I could also borrow iron hammers from my neighbors and use them to tap the rocks in the creek. That way, I could knock the fish hiding under rocks unconscious. After drying them at home, I could eat them without even needing to add oil or salt, and they were quite delicious as well. However, I was completely out of options that winter, and I would have starved to death if I didn't beg anyone for food. So, what could I do? I couldn't bring myself to beg in the beginning, so I kept telling myself that I had promised Mother that I would live on well in the future. So, how could I become a beggar just 1 year after my parents' deaths? I lay in bed at that time, and I felt like I could overcome my hunger if I just endured for a little while longer. Of course, hunger is hunger, and this couldn't be changed. However, I didn't lose consciousness because of this, and I instead became more awake the hungrier I got. In the end, I had no option but to climb out of bed and leave my house. I started to pace up and down Clay Vase Alley again, and there were several times when I wanted to knock on someone's door but ultimately refrained from doing so. I couldn't bring myself to beg no matter what. Afterward, I told myself that I would walk down Clay Vase Alley one last time. If still no one opened their door and invited me to a meal, then I would go and knock on someone's door to beg them for food. However, I silently vowed that I would definitely repay the family who was willing to feed me once I grew up. I started walking from the end of the alley where the Cow clan's ancestral residence is located, and there was still no one who opened their door even when I reached the other end of the alley where Gu Ken's house is located. The old man roared with laughter, and he didn't show any sign of compassion at all. What? So whose door did you end up knocking on? Were they willing to invite you in for a meal? Chen Ping'an hadn't appeared especially upset when recounting these things, and his expression became increasingly lively and buoyant when he reached this part of the story. As if he had taken a sip of the most delicious wine, he continued, I could only cry and walk back the way I had come. However, after taking a few steps, the courtyard door behind me suddenly creaked open. I didn't dare to look back at the start, but someone started to call out to me. I hurriedly wiped my tears away and turned around, and I saw a neighbor holding a fire basket in their hand. It's a type of small stove that has copper on the inside and woven bamboo on the outside, so someone can hold it in their hands and casually walk around. She seemed very surprised to see me. The old man clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, The heavens will always leave us a way out. Young lad, so you got a free meal just like this. Chen Ping'an vigorously wiped his face, which was already stained with tears. However, he grinned widely as he replied, No, that neighbor thought for a moment before saying, Little Ping'an, are you truly able to enter the mountains to collect herbs? Do you truly recognize those herbs? I naturally said yes, and I wasn't lying to her either. During those 2 years, I frequently went into the mountains every few days to collect herbs. In fact, I almost became more familiar with the mountains than Clay Vase Alley. My neighbor smiled and waved me over, and she said loudly, Great, then come over here, little Ping'an. I have something that I need your help with. My body can't endure the cold, so I need a few medicinal herbs to cook some medicine to nurture my body. However, the Yang family's medicine shop is too expensive, and I can't afford the herbs there. So, little Ping'an, can you enter the mountains to collect some herbs for me when spring arrives? I'll give you copper coins, but the price has to be lower. Chen Ping'an's voice became soft as he continued, I walked over to discuss this with her, and she used this opportunity to hand the fire basket to me. After finishing our discussion, she saw that I was still standing there, so she smiled and asked, What's wrong? You haven't eaten yet, so you want to get yourself a free meal? No, I won't let you in unless this is counted in the payment toward the medicinal ingredients. Chen Ping'an smiled and gazed toward the distance. After my parents passed away, I was able to see all kinds of expressions in people's eyes. Many children the same age as me swore at me and called me a wicked child who cursed my parents to die. Even if I only watched them flying kites and fishing from a long distance away, they would still pick up stones and throw them at me. Some adults also liked to scold me and call me a bastard. They said I was detestable and lowly filth who was too filthy to even become a wealthy person's slave. They said I was even more troublesome and in the way than the shattered porcelain pieces in the mountain of porcelain. However, when that lady chatted with me that day, and when she said that I needed to pay for food, Senior, you definitely don't know just how happy I was. When I went inside to eat, tears started to stream down my cheeks again. However, the lady joked and said, Oh, is my cooking too amazing or too terrible, little Ping'an? It can even cause someone to cry. At that time, I only dared to lower my head and eat, and to say that the food was delicious. The old man nodded and asked, Then did you ever consider the fact that your neighbor was actually trying to help you? However, she was simply helping you using a better method. Chen Ping'an nodded and replied, I didn't think of this at the start, but after eating at her house a few times, I quickly came to realize this. That neighbor was none other than Gu Kan's mother. Because of this, Chen Ping'an had always watched on from nearby whenever Gu Kan's mother argued with other people. There were a few times when the arguments had become very intense, and Gu Kan's mother had been surrounded and attacked by a bunch of other women. When they had rushed over to scratch her face and pull her hair, Chen Ping'an had also ran over to protect her. He hadn't fought back either, and he had simply stood there and allowed the other women to take their anger out on him. Thus, Chen Ping'an never thought of himself as a foolishly kind person. If Chen Ping'an didn't thank and repay someone as good as Gu Kan's mother, then Chen Ping'an felt like he wouldn't even be human. Regardless of how bad her reputation was in Clay Vase Alley and Apricot Blossom Alley, to Chen Ping'an, she was first and foremost his savior. After giving the small catfish to Gu Kan, so what if he found out later that it was actually a huge, fated opportunity? Chen Ping'an didn't regret his decision at all. When the world offers one bit of kindness, one should definitely cherish it and show gratitude, regardless of how big or small the act of kindness is. Thus, when Old Man Yao, Chen Ping'an's half-teacher, had said those words, the young boy had felt like it was the best saying in the world. If it's yours, then grab it with both hands. If it isn't yours, then don't even dream about it. No one in the world owes you anything. However, if you owe someone else something, then don't just ignore the matter. Afterward, this was exactly how Chen Ping'an had treated Liu Xianyang. Going into the mountains to collect herbs wasn't a long-term solution, after all, and it was eventually Liu Xianyang who had taught him how to set up traps to catch game, how to make bows, and how to fish. After entering the dragon kilns, it was also the slightly older Liu Xianyang who had looked after and protected Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an had struggled through his earlier years and eventually became a young boy, one who could feed and look after himself. Even though he was very willing to speak reason with other people, he would make an exception when it came to matters pertaining to Gu Kan or Liu Xianyang. For example, when the mountain-moving ape attacked Liu Xianyang and almost killed him, Chen Ping'an tossed aside all thoughts of trying to reason with it. As long as he was powerful enough, he would fight it to the death. Chen Ping'an had once said to a young girl from the outside world that if he found a girl as good as his mother, he would roll his sleeves up and fight to protect her even if their opponent was the Tao ancestor. Whether or not he could win the fight was one matter, and whether or not he was willing to fight to protect his wife was another matter. Chen Ping'an would feel very guilty and ashamed if he couldn't cherish and protect his own wife. Of course, Chen Ping'an felt like he had found that girl already. However, he simply hadn't confessed his feelings yet. It was because of this that he needed to embark on a long journey to deliver the sword. He was going to carry the 2 swords, which he had secretly named Subduing Demons and Eliminating Fiends, and walk up to her. He would then summon his courage and loudly confess, "Ning Yao, I like you. I like you very much, regardless of whether you like me or not." As for whether he would receive a slap or lose her as a friend, he would consider this after confessing to her. The old man grabbed the sword-nurturing gourd from Chen Ping'an's hand and took a large swig of wine. He didn't immediately toss the gourd back to the young boy, and he instead huffed, "This wine is genuinely mediocre. Go on, keep telling your story. These trivial and impure matters are only worthy of such lowly wine." Chen Ping'an thought for a moment before placing his hands inside the opposite sleeves and saying, "I seemingly came to some sort of realization after making it through that winter, and I also became shameless enough to beg others for food when I seriously couldn't endure my hunger anymore. I remembered all of their help, and I thought to myself that I would enter the mountains to earn money to repay them when the weather became warmer. Some kind-hearted elderly neighbors would also give old clothes to me, and I wouldn't feel embarrassed about accepting them anymore. I wouldn't lie about having enough, and I would instead accept their acts of goodwill. I went into the mountains as much as I could those few years, but I was still only able to make very small amounts of money. I was truly too weak, and many of the medicinal ingredients stocked by the Yang family's medicine shop were truly difficult to find. However, this was only normal, right? After all, how could widely available medicinal ingredients make me any money? So I started to help my neighbors in the alley. In the morning, I would help them draw water from the iron lock well, and when there was farm work, I would go and help them in the fields. At night, I would also hang around and help them fight for water, lest other people sever or redirect the water channels. I didn't dare to fight with others head-on, so I would always hide far away and wait for those strong young men to leave. Afterward, I would run over and secretly redirect water back to my neighbors' fields. Only after their fields received enough water would I undo my work and go home. Because of this, I was chased by other people many times. Fortunately, I was small and quick at that time, so I didn't suffer beatings too many times. The barefoot old man continued to leisurely drink wine from the small red gourd. Even though he said the wine was poor quality, he still continued to drink it one sip after another. He was truly drinking quite a bit. In any case, the old man wasn't feeling annoyed about Chen Ping'an's recollection of these trivial matters either. Chen Ping'an opened his heart up to the old man, and he felt much better after getting these things off his chest. He reached over to grab the red gourd, yet the old man raised his elbow and slapped his hand away. "Wait for a moment," the old man huffed. The barefoot old man held the wine gourd with 2 fingers and said slowly, "Chen Ping'an, you've recounted so many trivial matters, so do you want to hear some of my useless grand principles now? How powerful and lofty was I when I stood at the pinnacle of martial arts back then? Yet, even at my peak, I still found these grand principles completely and utterly useless. Do you want to hear them?" Chen Ping'an smiled and replied, "Go on, I love listening to the principles and reasonings of other people." The old man stood up and said, "I once had a chance encounter with a refined old scholar on the peak of a mountain in Middle-earth Divine Continent. I didn't know his identity at the time, but I was able to roughly guess it after my meeting with him. However, I was unable to understand his good intentions, and it was because of this that I was eventually reduced to a crazy and pitiful old man. Don't look at me and think that I'm nothing more than a pure martial artist who only knows how to talk about fist techniques. In reality, I'm a genuine scholar as well, and I've read an extremely large number of books. After chatting with the old scholar for a while, I asked him some things that I couldn't figure out by myself. After hearing my questions, the old scholar roughly explained some of his principles to me. The barefoot old man started to walk around in circles with the wine gourd in his hand. The old scholar said that we're living in a very complicated world where the words of many people are self-conflicting, even if they're incredibly knowledgeable scholars. After witnessing many unreasonable things, it's also inevitable that we start to question ourselves. Are the principles in the books wrong, or are they not complete and not comprehensive enough? The question arises, what should we do? How should we view this world in which many people expound principles yet fail to adhere to said principles? There is indeed a solution. One solution is to live a simple and straightforward life. My fist is powerful, or my sword techniques are powerful, or my Tao power is powerful, so I'll use these to shatter some matters that I see as incorrect. I'll use these simple methods to resolve the most difficult problems. Everything will be fine as long as I'm happy. If heaven and earth restrict me with their rules and regulations, then I'll shatter these things with a single punch. If a great Tao in the world is suppressing me, then I'll shatter the myriad Tao with my sword. Even if I'm unable to do this to my heart's content for the moment, I'll persevere and continue to walk down this path. There can be people like this, but we can't allow everyone to be like this." The old man stopped pacing around after saying this, and he looked at Chen Ping'an and said in a self-deprecating voice, "I belong to this category of people." The old scholar continued and said that the second solution was to live very smartly. One should live according to what will require the least effort and what will make their life the easiest. So-called rules and regulations are put into place for us to look for loopholes. If scholars choose this path, then they'll become nothing more than cynics. Following this solution, one can also make trade-offs between what is viewed as reasonable, choosing matters that adhere to a personal sense of reason, but that go against the world's sense of reason. This will lead to a bustling world where everyone acts according to self-interest. If this self-interest can be replaced with virtue, just how good will the world become? The last solution is to live a boring life where one overcomplicates already complicated issues. One can pedantically analyze principles, carefully comb through logic, and slowly ponder over issues. Doing all this is for the sake of understanding the reasons and motives behind a matter. However, after going around in a full circle, one might surprisingly find themselves back at the original spot. So, was everything for naught? Not necessarily, because one will feel very content and satisfied after making heads or tails of a matter. This feeling is like, taking a sip of aged wine and feeling a warm and fuzzy feeling spread through your body. The Confucian sages that we scholars praise so highly aren't, in fact, as profoundly good and perfect as people like to think. They're also very much human. However, the true principles and teachings of Confucianism definitely aren't fragile and useless either. Even if one doesn't agree with the notion of human nature being fundamentally good at birth, so be it. After all, we can always encourage people to strive for goodness. The barefoot old man started to pace around in circles again, and he eventually stopped and added, "I don't dare to confirm whether that old man was that person or not. However, thinking back to our conversation at that time, it wouldn't have been easy for that old scholar to calmly say those words to me if he genuinely was that person. After all, I was in Middle-earth divine continent to attack their base." The old man raised the small red gourd and took a large gulp of wine. He then casually tossed the sword-nurturing gourd back to Chen Ping'an before gazing into the distance and roaring with hearty laughter. I traveled all around the world back then, and it would be truly stifling if I didn't spit out all of the grand rhetoric and rousing declarations in my mind. Standing in front of the cliff, the old man stepped forward and gazed up at the sky. "When I traveled between heaven and earth, the brilliant sun in the sky and the radiant moon at night both had to ask me, 'Is the world bright enough?'" The old man turned around and asked with a chuckle, "Chen Ping'an, do you feel like this is enough?" Chen Ping'an was just about to lower his head and drink a sip of wine. After hearing this, he had no option but to look up and dazedly reply, "Not quite." The old man roared with laughter. He pointed into the distance and continued, "When I walked across rivers and lakes, the roaring rivers and surging waves had to ask me, 'Have I enough water to quench your thirst?'" Chen Ping'an hurriedly seized this opportunity to drink a sip of wine. After hearing the old man's rousing words, he couldn't help but feel a slight sense of boldness as well. With one hand holding his wine gourd and one hand clenched into a fist and resting on his knee, he also joined in on the action and loudly declared, "It's not enough." The old man continued, "When I traversed the peaks of mountains, the extravagant abodes and the lofty immortals had to ask me, 'Is the breeze atop the mountain cool enough?'" Chen Ping'an's face was flushed red, and he took another large swig of wine and borrowed the strong effects of the alcohol to wantonly roar with laughter. This was unprecedented for him, and he shouted with a glowing expression, "This isn't enough. It's far from enough. There's not enough wine, there's not enough water, and there's not enough mountain breeze. There's not enough of anything." Outside the bamboo building, the little boy in azure and the little girl in pink exchanged a glance. The little girl in pink was slightly worried about her master. He wasn't going to become a young drunkard, was he? Meanwhile, the little boy in azure grumbled in his mind, "Has master gone crazy? Perhaps he's gone stupid from training with the old man? Hess, does that mean I don't need to cultivate so earnestly anymore? Why don't I slack off for a few days?" In the end, Chen Ping'an became drunk and collapsed to the ground along with his bamboo chair. And from this day onward, the world was introduced to a new young drunkard. 1. Cynicism is a school of thought in ancient Greek philosophy. According to cynicism, people are reasoning animals and the purpose of life, and the way to gain happiness is to achieve virtue, in agreement with nature, following one's natural sense of reason by living simply and shamelessly free from social constraints.